Something about this one doesn't feel right there's just something missing. Perfect. Night of the Living Dead, the first zombie movie? No. The first modern zombie movie? Yes. We are, of course, talking about the incredibly influential 1968 zombie film Night of the Living Dead. A classic, a movie rightfully in the Criterion Collection, a movie so good and so influential, it created a whole new type of movie monster and redefined the word zombie. From what used to mean a Haitian inspired voodoo slave, it now meant slow moving, reanimated corpses who seek out the living for lunch. And the only way to kill them is by removing the head or destroying the brain. Shout out to yesterday's movie, Shaun of the Dead. Or fire, of course, because nothing living or dead likes to be on fire. Among the most iconic lines in probably movie history is,
"They're coming to get you, Barbara."
which helps kick off a whirlwind of a movie about a ragtag group of people who barricade themselves in an old farmhouse to try to stay safe from the flesh-eating ghouls slash things slash murderers wandering the Pennsylvania countryside looking for the living. Night of the Living Dead is directed by George A. Romero, who also co-wrote the film with John A. Russo. Spoilers for just this whole movie, right? If this is a movie you haven't seen by now, shame on you. This is movie history, and obviously a film you should have seen by now because it's important. And I say this knowing full well of all the famous and important films I haven't seen, some of which will be in the rest of this month. This movie starts off in such an interesting way as we are introduced to a brother named Johnny and his sister Barbara, who are making their way to visit the gravesite of their father. Now, the radio in the car is on the fritz and then turned off right before it presumably tells the two siblings about the unusual phenomenon occurring of the living dead hunting the living alive. Johnny and Barbara are attacked by a ghoul, which takes out Johnny and then Barbara slowly, and I mean comically slowly, drives away and then just crashes into nothing and then runs to an old farmhouse where the rest of the movie takes place outside of sporadic news broadcasts. Now, I listened to a lot of George Romero interviews about this movie, and it's so interesting to hear him talk about how the main point of this movie was people will argue over the dumbest little things like, should we stay upstairs or should we barricade ourselves in the basement while the world ends just outside the door? I mean, man, thank God that was just a problem in the 1960s, and our culture put all our petty differences aside for a better tomorrow here in 2025. Now, getting back into the movie, once Barbara's in the farmhouse, we are quickly introduced to our main protagonist of the film, which is a character called Ben, played by Duane Jones. This may shock people, but he was a black man, which added a whole other layer to the film and was one of the first times in cinema history that a black man was portrayed as a hero and also as a strong-willed leader whose plans always seem in the best interest of protecting the group. And then the ending of a bunch of white townsfolk shooting Duane, the last survivor of the group, added powerful social commentary to the movie that still to this day makes Jordan Peele bust. And also, if this happened today, would drive YouTube movie channels to put so many googly eyes in their thumbnails that Trump would something something. See, I can also do social commentary. Now, Night of the Living Dead never calls the creatures in the film zombies. They are referred to as ghouls and murderers and things and probably some other things I'm forgetting, but apparently the ghouls are ghouls because of space radiation or a satellite or Venus something or just a bunch of random things mentioned on what feels like a never-ending news broadcast that takes over too much of the movie in a good chunk of it just to tell the audience endless amounts of exposition. I think without question it's the weakest part of the film because in the end of things, it doesn't really matter where these things came from or why they are doing what they're doing. The movie is just about survival. And I think the most haunting and still to this day, probably most viscerally disturbing moment of this movie, even after watching it as many times as I had, is the Cooper daughter killing her mother. Now, the Coopers are a family also stuck in the farmhouse with Barbara and Ben. The father, Henry Cooper, played by Carl Hardman, is set up as the clear antagonist to the Ben character, not necessarily because he is the bad guy, but because he has a different opinion of what the group should do to survive. With, I mean, obviously tensions ratcheted up to 11. Ben and Harry are aggressively against each other, arguing, fist fighting, and then in one of the most shocking scenes of the film, Ben just straight up shoots Harry after Harry hesitates to save Ben when he is locked out of the farmhouse as the living dead are slowly creeping towards him. Uh, the last 20 minutes of this movie delves into pure chaos as the zombies, or I'm sorry, ghouls, break into the house. Barbara is taken into the horde of ghouls by her own zombified brother, and Ben shoots Harry. But the part in this movie that still to this day affects me the most is it's briefly mentioned earlier in the film that the Cooper's daughter was bitten earlier and she is recovering in the basement. Towards the end of the film, when the mother, Helen, played by Marilyn Eastman, runs to the basement after all shit has hit the fan, she discovers her daughter, Karen, eating the arm of her dead husband and obviously Karen's father. And then Karen stands up and grabs a gardening shovel and just stabs her mother in the chest repeatedly as she lets out a blood curdling scream. And the audio echoes to really hammer home the point of what a surreal moment in the film this is. By today's standards, that scene is still wildly eerie and haunting. I can't even imagine seeing that moment playing out in a theater in 1968.
Oh, baby. Baby.
Also, shout out to Sheriff McLean, played by George Casana. The way he delivers every line is just pitch perfect, and his ending line is delivered so matter of factly that I think it really elevates those last few moments in the film.
Good shot. Okay, he's dead. Let's go get him. That's another one for the fire.
And then the credits, where it's just still images with this melody and people talking over it, really hammers home how upsetting the ending really is. And there you have it. Day 2 in the books with Night of the Living Dead. Now join me right back here tomorrow on this channel for Train to Busan, the 2016 Korean zombie film, as we continue the 31 days of horror hullaba boo. See you tomorrow.